John,
Angie.
what are your thoughts on the group thing?
Angie, I'm not sure I should answer that kind of question in front of our audience.
Not where I was going, but now I think I might know a little better how your mind works. Now back to our session topic.
You know exactly how my mind works. You mean
Do.
group coaching, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's hop to it, shall we?
Yeah, good idea.
Welcome to the Coaching Clinic with John and Angie.
The show for professional coaches who want to develop their skills and grow their business.
Follow the show on your favorite podcast app.
And join us every Wednesday for new episodes.
Well, yeah, group coaching. We've both done a lot of group coaching over the while,
Yeah.
but before we get to our topic, hey, we have just recently set up a brand new YouTube channel, and we'd love you to come and join us there. We're sharing clips from the show. We're going to share some exclusive content there as well over time. So come and find the Coaching Clinic podcast on YouTube, subscribe to the show, and we'd love to see you there as well. But for today, group coaching, Angie, do you enjoy doing the group stuff?
God help me today with you. So, when it comes to coaching, yes, I have to say I do. And I think it's because that's where my beginnings were, in becoming a coach. Like I was a trainer. So, of course, as a trainer, everything was in groups, right? I did sales training, I did all sorts of training for different arenas. So I think it naturally was my space and I love being there. I went to school to be a teacher, wanted to be a teacher, then realized there were politics and said no thank you. But anyway, that's a different story for a different time. But I do. I have to say I do. I love doing the group coaching thing.
Yeah, I mean, we did an episode a little while ago, episode 54 for us, where we are talking about scaling up your coaching business and how group coaching is probably one of the first steps that people will usually
Mhm.
take in coaching for scaling up their business. So I think it is an important one to look at. And much like you, I was doing group coaching from early on in my coaching career. Probably wasn't the first thing I was doing. I think I did all my training one to one, and I did move fairly soon into group coaching though. So probably 3 years of one to one, and then I was mostly doing group coaching, and it's very different. It's very different,
Very
and
different.
there was a lot to learn for doing it. So it doesn't really work quite the same way. What are some of the things that you noticed about how it's different?
Well, I think that as the coach, the first thing you have to remember is that you really need to keep people engaged, and I didn't realize. So now think, okay, I always do this, don't I? When I go back to when I first started being a trainer slash coach, there wasn't, the phone issue. There was less distraction. So it was a bit easier to do that. So your audience was somewhat, captivated to begin with, unless they were just kind of nodding off or something. But so that was like a really good experience. However, I quickly learned that when I did this intentionally as part of my business, it was oh my gosh, when you can see all the faces. So whether you're in person or you're doing it virtually, and you could see all the faces and the phones and the buzzing and it definitely required not just different skill set, but a different level of patience. Because I could remember I just remember getting like triggered. I hate to use that word, by the way, but in one of my live sessions, and this one particular person, the phone just kept going off, and they're looking at it, and I have the attention span of a flea, so I was getting distracted. So I really had to take that step back and say, wait a minute, how am I going? You're laughing, but I could do, oh, squirrel, there it is, like I'm off in some other way. And
Yeah,
so it does require, I think, a different set of skills in order
yeah,
to keep so engaged. I think that's the first, like, oh, what makes a great coach able to be a great group coach? Engagement. You
right.
have to keep people engaged.
Yeah, I feel like we need one of those wibbly wobbly screen effects for when we do our back in time stories, way back when we first started. I'll see if I can sort that out. But no, I was laughing because you actually reminded me of how much of a challenge it was for me as someone who is also very easily distracted. I think it's one of the things we do have in common. But yeah, overcoming distractions and staying focused and present on a group coaching call. Oof, that was very challenging to me. But I don't think I've ever done group coaching in person. I've done group training, I've done
Oh.
different group events, but I don't think I've ever done that in person. And so I wonder what the experience was like for you of doing that. And especially you say you had someone who was annoying you with the mobile phone.
I
What
could
else was
still
going
see
on?
that person. Oh, yeah. So also too, I think that in any coaching that you do, whether it's in person or it's virtual, there's always that those one or two that want to be, they talk and they're, kind of cutting everybody else off and they need to have all their questions answered. So you have to know how to manage that, obviously, as well, because we don't ever want to be rude intentionally, but we have to be able to kind of cut that off and make sure, because what happens is the other people start getting annoyed that are involved if it becomes the Angie show, right? If I'm the person going, well, I had this every time, whether I'm in the classroom, right, and I'm a student, or I'm the instructor, if you will. I've always had that experience, even with some of the things that you and I have done in the past. There's always at least one. So you have to be able to diplomatically manage that so that you're really not insulting anybody. You want to honor
Yeah.
everybody. But that's another, always, like, they just pop up like a groundhog and they keep burrowing and making holes.
Yeah, and it is one of the things that if you're gonna F up on a solo coaching call, is only gonna affect you and the one person on the call. But you do that on a group coaching call, and it's gonna affect more people. So, is a bigger potential for the
Oh,
F
yeah.
ups. Being very
Absolutely.
very genteel with my language today, I'm controlling myself. But, I tell you what, I don't think I really would even want to have an in-person group coaching thing because I think I've just done the
Really?
online. Yeah, and I'll tell you what, because I've done the online thing for so long, and I don't really want to be in a situation where people can distract each other as well.
Mm.
As much as the coach can be distracted, so can the people who are being coached. And I think if they're actually able to easily interact with each other, sitting next to each other or grouping together, I think there is actually more potential for disruption in the group, or distraction at the very least.
Hmm. Interesting, because it's so funny.
Just a
Like,
thought.
I feel the total opposite. I definitely love my group coaching in person because I think I'm able to better captivate. I don't stand in the front of the room like an instructor. I'm busy walking around and I'm doing things, and I create intentional pieces where I'm inviting them to interact. And that can be a little dangerous too, because all of a sudden it's like, blah, blah, like, just hear the murmurs and the talking, and you're like, okay, wait. Let's come back to center for a minute. So, but again, I think for me, it's because I started in that space. So it feels just more natural to me to be able to do that. I
Yeah.
love being in person and doing it.
And that's probably the case for me with group coaching online. But it's funny because I've never really seen you walking or being up on the stage, and I just kind of like to imagine that you sort of float everywhere or glide
Oh,
like
yeah,
you're
I'm
on
floating
coast,
all right.
like you're on coasters or something. You just floating around. Uh, that's just how my that's just my imagination. But I'll say I'll say this: my first experiences with group coaching, I was also being trained as a trainer for the company that I was with,
Mhm.
and and I may have mentioned a few of these things before on previous episodes, but for those who haven't heard that, one of the things they were very big on was energy. And I do feel that there is a thing of, well, certainly when you're there in person, you have to do this, but even more so, I think when you're doing online group stuff, you have to turn up the energy dials that bit more. Not to crazy levels, not to like, bouncing off the walls, pumped up on Adderall or something sort of levels, but to to a level where you just turn things up, where the energy is higher and stronger, where you are leading the energy
Yeah,
of the group. And so you don't want it to be hyper energy. You just want it to be dialed up a bit so that it's stronger, and maybe even just a voice more commanding with your voice, and
absolutely.
a bit more physically commanding as well. So you need to look and sound and feel confident when you're doing that. But also, I think people need to be able to feel that energy for you, because if you're low energy on group coaching and you're leading the energy of the group, guess what the group's going to have?
Oh, you're
Low energy.
definitely the pace car. I heard that years ago when I was being trained to work. I worked for a coaching company, as you know. And one of the things that always stuck with me, and I think I knew this, but you're the pace car. You're going to set the tone. If your energy is low, it's definitely going to affect the room. And it can, listen, even in a one-on-one, you kind of do, but you have to be able to come to it and be, right? Create the atmosphere and the environment that you want to your your students, right? Or whomever, however you want to refer to them, your clients to experience. I'm challenged by sitting in the space, right? Because you see right now, even my hands are going. I stepped away from the desk a little bit because when I need my energy to go up, I have to be able to like kind of move the hands and move the body. Hard to do that from a seat. So I don't know. I think I'm probably better in person than I am online, right? Virtually, but it definitely presents a different set of challenges for somebody like me because I can end up being the distraction. So I've had to learn to harness my energy where I think most people are struggling with the opposite. They're struggling to bring this like
Yeah.
energy and however, that elevated space. And I'm like, "Ooh, we got to take a step back. We have to harness this a little bit."
I think that that brings up something probably might do a little episode on, because I'm one of those people that definitely not naturally high energy. I had to do a lot of work, had to do a lot of work to turn my energy up, and even then, I always worry about probably more than I should. But I always concern myself about, all right, is my vocal variety good? Am I coming up with
Yeah.
enough energy? Do I need to turn the dials up a bit more? Um, and I still want it to feel natural. Um, but it's been hard to find that for me because it wasn't natural for me. It was more, very much like my dad, very kind of stoic, quiet.
You're a
For
great. No, I'm
I,
joking. Cut
I
that out. Don't put that in.
for all our British viewers, and Angie's anti-British. No, I don't think that for a moment. But my dad's very quiet. My dad's a listener. My dad, and I'm very much like him when it comes to those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And even to the point where, so shouldn't talk too much about that, but he kind of mumbles a bit when he talks, and that has been a tendency for me as well, as I very much have taken after him in
Mm.
more ways than we probably want to take after our parents. So I had to do a lot of work on those things because those are things that just do not work when you're coaching, when you're training, when you're on the stage, that you have
Hmm.
to step out of that and break through those things. I think I've done okay with it. There may still be room for growth.
Listen, I think as coaches, we always have that room for growth, but I think it's important for people like our listeners to understand, you can captivate whether you're in person or you're doing something virtually. It's not, I don't want to say it's so easy, but there are some things that like, well, what do I do? Well, you mentioned it, right? Sometimes it's your tone, right? What are you talking about in that moment? Does it require higher energy? Does it require, a more seriousness? Just your tone for me, I'm from the Northeast. I talk very quickly and I have to consciously and intentionally work through that every single time I do a coaching session or I do a group type of a thing, even a speaking engagement where I get excited and I have to draw it back. So you really need to pay attention to some of the body language, even if you're just sitting at a desk or, something like that. Your tone, right? Am I trying to be serious here? Am I slowing down my speech, the rate at which I'm speaking? And how do I think this is hugely important. If people are starting to, because, adults now, I think it's 12 minutes, I think, it used to be 16. And it's changed, I guess, depending on who you talk to. But the attention span of an adult, if you don't, incorporate into your training or your coaching some type of, and I will call it a pattern interrupt, maybe, like energetically, you know, something to shift and wake everybody up, you're going to be dead in the water. Whether you're doing a speaking event, doing a one-to-one coaching, or you're even doing this group coaching that we're talking about, you have to keep them captivated. And that's, what do you do when you realize, if you're looking at the screen or you're looking at the audience and you see people kind of like starting to look up at the ceiling and they're looking away, they're looking at their nails, what do you do?
Yeah, it's an
And
interesting thing.
flashing them is not an option.
So I've been told, but it's lost me several jobs, that one. But yeah, I do find like one of the things that is challenging, particularly with doing online group coaching, is you must do that, and you don't necessarily have quite the same ways of doing it as you do when you're there in person. It's very easy to do a sort of turn to the person next to you and say yeah, or give them a high five or stuff like that. I think probably most of us have had those experiences if we've been to any kind of coaching or personal development event. You can't do that so much on virtual events, and you also know you are competing with whatever else is going on in their environment, on their mobile
Sure.
phone or whatever else, because most people do not put their mobiles away or off or face down
Oh,
or
I
whatever.
asked. Do you ask?
When
Because I asked them to. I tell them put it on silent and turn it upside down on your desk or whatever, whatever they're sitting, wherever they're sitting. I specifically ask
right,
for that now.
but you have no control over that. So they may do it, they may not do it. They may be in a noisy environment, and so I quite often find that on online group coaching calls
Sure.
as well. And so you get people to share, and you can barely barely hear what they're saying. But all of that is distraction. So being able to keep them tuned into what you're saying and present, you have to do a lot of that. Type this into the chat box. Does everyone get this? What have you learned? What stood
Yeah.
out for you here? Keep the sharing coming. I'd say probably even more than in an in-person event. I think we're much more used to distracting ourselves when we're on our own anyway. And
Yeah.
even if we're on a call with someone else, or with a group, we can still do that. We still don't necessarily shut away all those notifications and whatever else is coming up.
Ask John, he'll tell you it took 30 episodes for me to turn off my my notifications on iPhone while we're recording. But again, it wasn't a habit, but it's a great habit. I mean, there are definitely some checkpoints, I think, for when you're doing things virtually. I think virtually is much more challenging for that reason because you have zero control over the other environment. If you have a group of people in a room, whether it's 20 people or 2,000 people, you have a little bit more control of the environment. Who's there? What's there? The temperature. If you have 20 people in a virtual group coaching, again, dogs are barking, kids are crying and screaming. There's sirens in the background. How do we know? Because we've both experienced all of that. And you do have to do,
And
I
more.
think, I don't know, I do this at the beginning. I do a little bit of housekeeping before I even get into whether it's just for the day or if it's a series of coaching events that I'm doing with the same group. And I will say, please be mindful and respectful of yourself, me, your peers, the people that are on here, because distractions are going to change your outcomes, whether you
Yeah.
think they can or not. And that includes, close the door, shut the windows, you're hot, put the fan on, whatever it is. And I try to make a little bit light of it, but there's always that person that, you still hear things. I'm like, excuse me, John, never mind. Let me just mute John. Let me make sure John is
Yeah.
muted,
You know,
you
it'd be
know?
me.
Well,
Yeah.
no, and I'm
Um,
using you as obviously the example, but
I
that's
know
you
that.
sometimes have to be able to manage that a little bit because the distractions for you as the coach and for the other people, and if you're distracted, so are the other people. You know that because you're
Yeah,
seeing each other
absolutely.
in the same lens.
And you may think, doesn't everybody know that? It's like, yeah, but there's a reason why they still have to tell you at the start of a theater show or the cinema to turn off your mobile phones and put
Yes.
them on silent, because
Yes.
people don't. People
Yes.
still don't. They know. People do know. They just don't think about it, or they don't think it applies to them, or they forgot that they have their phone on full
Yeah.
volume. And I still, to this day, do not understand people who have their phone on full volume. I mean, is there any need for that? I think vibrate is perfectly acceptable
Of
unless
course
there's
you
an
do.
emergency unless there's an emergency situation going on somewhere.
I am today. What is going on? People are going to be hitting
What's
unsubscribe today. What is wrong with Angie today?
Or maybe we'll find ourselves with more subscribers. Who knows? It could go either way. It could go either way, Angie, I think. But look, I'll say this. I nearly lost the coaching job because I wasn't able to get my energy up initially
Really?
to the level that they wanted
Mm,
me to be at. They were very keen that there had to be a high level of energy. There had to be it had to be good and strong and confident. And we did several test coaching sessions where I was told I wasn't meeting the standard, and not nice to hear, not nice feedback. But it was actually to a point where they said, "All right, we're going to give you one more go at this, and if you can't figure this out, if you can't get there, we'll find someone else who can."
oh,
So
wow.
it was very much like that. Look, to some people, it was harsh, but it was what was needed. And if I hadn't have been able to get to where they felt that I needed to be, I think they were well within their rights to say, "All right, you're not there. You don't really have what we need right now."
Sure.
And I would probably, I might be a bit more diplomatic about how I approached it with somebody, but I would probably be the same if it was somebody representing me and my business, and their energy wasn't where I needed it to be.
Well, I think it's important too to recognize that what you're talking about, right? What your subject matter is, I think that matters. But that doesn't mean that, let's say, for example, on the one hand, we're talking about raising puppies. Oh my gosh, I could get out there and be like, warm and fuzzy and even a little silly and be like, oh my God, look at this cute little fuzzy face and be a totally different person, right? And then if I'm talking about biologics, which will never happen, but I want to do the extreme, right? If I'm speaking to a group of medical experts, let's just say on energy, or
Mhm.
managing their teams because, naturally in that field, those people, engineers, doctors, they're much more pragmatic, much more stoic. You have to know that. You need to know who your subject matter is going to attract if you're doing that, and if it is like I'm just doing basic life coaching, well then you need to understand, you need to be able to manipulate, and I don't mean this in a negative, but the entire room. You can't just attract or speak to, if you will, with the air quotes, the energetic people, the joiners. There's going to be those quiet people, and I'll call on them. I'll be like, so John, what do you think of that? And I purposely make them uncomfortable, but you really need to know who you're attracting so that you kind of know, all right, well, how do I engage this room? I think it's a little more difficult when you're dealing with a group that is not necessarily like, so you, John, you might do great with the biologics. You might do very well because the mannerisms and the way in which you speak naturally. But somebody like me, I have to dial it in, put the silly aside, and be much more serious. Which, okay, I'm not saying I'm not serious in my business because I definitely am, but I have to bring a different energy. That doesn't mean that I still don't need to keep them awake. I
Mm.
just need to do it speaking their
Yeah,
language. So,
that's
are
right.
you doing a mixed bag of life coaching or are you doing a specific theme in your coaching? I think that matters.
Yeah, I do very well in those places where somebody serious is needed because of being such a serious person.
Right. And what did I say before we started recording today? If people could, we should just do a recording of our free recording conversations.
Yeah, but we couldn't publish it. That's the
We
problem.
probably couldn't,
Uh,
but don't
I
let
don't think
John
so.
fool you.
I think we'd get banned from YouTube if we published those. But here's what I'll say with group coaching, because I think the primarily managing a larger group is a bit more challenging.
Hmm.
And being on your feet for saying the right kinds of things at the right kind of time is also challenging.
Yeah.
And I know I've messed up on the group. I think one time on a group call, I said something like, I was trying to encourage people into one-to-one coaching. So I kind of decided to set things up of like saying, "Oh, the group coaching is really for the people who are entry level into coaching, and the one-to-one coaching is for a
Oh,
bit more is a more advanced level."
oops.
And several people in the group quit the coaching after that because
Oops.
they didn't. I know it was such a bad thing to do, and it's like, oh, like it completely backfired. Nobody really liked what I'd said or
Mhm.
suggested that the group coaching was less than the one-to-one coaching. But so you learn those mistakes very quickly. um but so it's one of the things where sometimes it's worth taking a beat to think what you want to say, allow the pauses, let other people share and fill the space, but you also need to make sure
Yeah,
people aren't dominating the conversation. Make sure you
correct.
hear from people that you haven't been hearing from, that everybody gets to share or feel that their voice is being involved in some way. um it's skills
Yeah, the
that you have
management
to
of
learn.
time changes. You have to be
Yeah,
very, very, I think, if it's just you doing some type of, you're the person in charge and you're talking, it's very different. But if you are making it interactive, you have to be able to manage time, kind of make sure things don't start to run over because once you give
yeah,
somebody the floor, so to speak, I mean, sometimes there's just no stopping them. You're like sitting there going,
right.
no, no, no. And you have to be able to, again, diplomatically say, you know what, wait, that's really great. Let's pause there. Let's talk about something that John just said and just
Yeah,
stop it without telling them to be quiet.
I have a weekly group coaching that I've been doing for, gosh, I mean, must be nearly 15 years, and it's still going, which is good.
That's great.
And yeah, it's pretty good, and I like doing it, and I know what to say. It's become very comfortable, but the timing thing was very relevant to that because when I was first doing it, probably for the first 6 months or so, the sessions were running sometimes hour 15, hour and a half, and it's only supposed to be 60
Mm,
minutes. And so I started to figure out that, with the amount of share time that we had, I could only take 3 shares, and I needed to keep them on track. So sometimes I'd have to guide them and say, okay, we don't need all the detail. Just give us the overview here. Um, so if I allowed more than that, the sessions would overrun. If I allowed myself to be self-indulgent about wanting to share or teach something more than I
mm-hmm.
usually would, the session's going to overrun.
Right.
And so it's like, well, with group coaching, I think you do want to try and keep more to session time because very often people do have stuff planned in for straight after their sessions that they have to go.
Right.
Nearly always have someone saying, "Oh, if the session's overrunning, I'm sorry, I have to go." So far better, I think, to finish in time, even if that means not
Yes.
everybody might have gotten to share, and not everybody's going to get, perhaps as much as they could do out of the session, because there may have been some wonderful pearl of wisdom that you would have liked to share. But you just can't afford to be self-indulgent with these things, and you
Yeah.
have to respect the time of the people who are on the call with
Well,
you.
I think setting that
Some
as a
Yeah,
standard is very important, though. I
yeah,
think that saying, like, hey, John, I would love to hear it. So, well, John, what are your thoughts? And hey, everybody, just because I want to be respectful of your time. John, do me a favor, keep this at 2 minutes. Whatever it is you want to share, try and keep this at about 2 minutes because that's the allotted time for this. There's nothing wrong with you. Don't pretend like, oh, well, I'm doing all this magic behind the scenes. Ask these adults that have no idea like what the time concept even really looks like. Um, if they don't have an appointment after, they might be happy to ramble on for 10, 15 minutes. And they will if you let them. So there's nothing wrong with putting it out there and saying, John, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I saw your hand up. We have 2 minutes because, of course, as I said, I want to honor everybody's time today. What are your thoughts? Right? I tell him, but I don't, pound it in for 10 minutes and use his time. I just
yeah.
remind him. And there's nothing wrong with managing the group that way.
I pretty much always have 2 to 5 extra minutes at the end of a session,
Sure.
so that I can let the people go who want to go, and the people who maybe have extra questions, if there's anything we didn't get to cover in the call, or they have just a coaching question that's come up for
Yeah.
them, we have a little time for that. But again, probably only really time for 1, maybe 2 questions, depending
Yeah.
on what comes up.
Right.
But I think that's probably a good way to do it.
Sounds
I hope
good.
this is helpful. I hope this is helpful for people about how
Yeah.
we kind of run group coaching calls and manage not to be too distracted all the time. But yeah, we may touch back on this topic again at some point in the future.
Yeah, I would love to hear some questions about group coaching from people. What maybe some things maybe we didn't cover or you'd like to hear a little more about. Love to hear back from you.
Yeah. I was actually thinking just now about how some people may actually be interested in how do you do the process of scaling up from one-to-one to group and getting
Yeah,
people from one-to-one into group coaching. That might be something for us to come back to.
sounds good to me.
Awesome.
Do you have a question for the coaching clinic?
Reach out on LinkedIn to connect with Angie and John.
Leave us a voicemail or video message and we will feature you on the show.
You can also leave up to 90-second voicemail for free on www.speakpipe.com/the Coaching Clinic podcast.
We'd love to hear from you.
See you next time.
Bye for now.